This is a Fox News Alert. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. A new Pentagon report says China's Air Force is taking aim at the U.S. The annual report to Congress states that the Chinese military is, quote, likely training for strikes on U.S. targets. And that's not all. This report concludes the People's Liberation Army is developing its nuclear capabilities and focusing on vastly improving already formidable cyber operations. The report comes just a day after word the Trump administration is restarting trade talks with China. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin with our report from the Pentagon.
An annual Pentagon report to Congress warns China's military is likely training for strikes on U.S. targets. The People's Liberation Army, quote, has rapidly expanded its overwater bomber operating areas, gaining experience in critical maritime regions and likely training for strikes against U.S. and allied targets. The Chinese Air Force has also shifted to a nuclear mission. The report echoes public warnings for months from top Pentagon officials that China remains the U.S. military's biggest long-term challenge.
Without focused involvement and engagement by the United States and our allies and partners, China will realize its dream of hegemony in Asia. We should cooperate with Beijing where we can, but stand ready to confront them where we must.
In May, Chinese strategic bombers landed for the first time on the disputed Woody Islands, a dramatic expansion of Chinese military claims in the oil-rich South China Sea. Last year, China signed a 99-year lease for a port in Sri Lanka, which could be used for its military. A year ago, China opened its first overseas military base in Djibouti, deploying a company of Marines and equipment next door to a U.S. drone base in the Horn of Africa. The report said cyber attacks from China continue. Quote, computer systems around the world, including those owned by the U.S. government, continued to be targeted by China-based intrusions through 2017. Separate concerns about China's behavior in cyberspace manifested itself in Silicon Valley, with 1,000 Google employees signing a letter protesting Google's decision to agree to a Chinese government request to censor search engine results.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry responded to the Pentagon report accusing the U.S. of displaying a Cold War mentality. Bret?
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. The Trump administration is taking steps to remove itself from the conflict in Syria by ending funding for the country's stabilization projects. Officials said today it is notifying, the administration is notifying Congress that it would not spend some $200 million that had been planned for Syria programs, instead shifting that money elsewhere. The administration saying the cut will be more than offset by an additional $300 million pledged by coalition partners, a move the administration touts as a big success as countries step up to the plate to share the burden there. President Trump's plans for a military parade here in our nation's capital are now on hold. And along with the loss of all the plans for pomp and circumstance and pageantry, civility also quickly went out the window as critics and the administration alike took to name-calling over the cost of such a parade. Correspondent Kevin Cork joins us live from the White House North Lawn with all the back and forth. Good evening, Kevin.
Evening, Bret. The idea was born along the Champs-Elysees, but the president's parade will not be happening anytime soon, proving that once again, sometimes even patriotism comes at a price. After marveling at a Bastille Day parade he attended in Paris last year, President Trump wanted to do something similar here in Washington to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. But faced with the grim reality of soaring costs, the commander-in-chief instead retreated. On Twitter, he accused local Washington, D.C. officials of looking to cash in, writing they wanted a number so ridiculously high that I canceled it. Never let someone hold you up. The cost proposed by D.C. officials ran into the tens of millions of dollars, including for police, $13 million, transportation, $2 million, fire and emergency, $3.5 million. That plus other costs driving the total up to $21 million. The city's Democratic mayor bragged on Twitter that she'd finally got through to the, quote, reality star in the White House with the realities, $21.6 million, of parades, events, demonstrations in Trump America. Sad. Cost has been a major sticking point from the very outset. While America's last large-scale parade here in Washington cost upwards of $8 million back in 1991, multiple Defense Department officials involved in planning estimate the cost this time could top $90 million. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis appeared caught off guard by that figure.
Whoever told you that is probably smoking something that's legal in my state, but not in most states, okay?
About which Connecticut Democratic Senator Dick Blumenthal tweeted, "Real patriotism should mean $92 million to honor military service and benefit veterans, not glorify politicians." Not one to miss an opening, the president, noting Blumenthal's past misrepresentation of his military service, tweeted, "How can Senator Richard Blumenthal pass judgment on anyone? Loser." The president will now attend a small event over at Andrews Air Force Base before making his way to Paris, France, to commemorate the end of World War I. That'll happen later this fall in November, Bret.
Now, Kevin, more than a dozen former senior intelligence officials penned a letter today criticizing the president's decision to revoke former CIA Director Brennan's security clearance. And now this afternoon, dozens more former CIA officers adding to that. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, dozens more indeed. We're talking about more than 5 dozen all told. That list expected to continue to grow. That includes, by the way, Bret, names like Porter Goss, Michael Hayden, Robert Gates, and Leon Panetta. They're questioning the president's motivation for revoking that security clearance. Let me share part of the letter. It reads this way. It says, "We all agree that the president's action regarding John Brennan and the threats of similar action against other former officials has nothing to do with who should and should not hold security clearances, and everything to do with an attempt to stifle free speech." Now, the letter, Bret, comes as the president is preparing to revoke the clearance of Bruce Orr, the Justice Department official who's been ensnared by the Russia probe and the use of the infamous Steele dossier.
I think Bruce Orr is a disgrace. I suspect I'll be taking it away very quickly. I think that Bruce Orr is a disgrace with his wife Nellie. For him to be in the Justice Department and to be doing what he did, that is a disgrace.
Bret, no word yet on when Orr's security clearance might be revoked. Of course, we're working. Our sources will bring you the very latest as soon as we get it. I should also mention that Virginia Senator Mark Warner is expected to introduce legislation that would stop the president from continuing this idea of revoking security clearances. That could come as soon as next week. Bret?
More on all this with the panel. Kevin, thank you. Jurors have gone home for the weekend after a second day of deliberations in the fraud trial of President Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. Thursday, jurors submitted questions to the judge. Today, it was the media with questions. Correspondent Peter Ducey joins us live outside the courthouse again with what they asked Judge Ellis. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Bret. The jury has now deliberated for more than 14 hours over a 2-day span, and they knew there wasn't going to be a verdict today because this afternoon they asked if they could go home early, and the judge said yes. Judge T.S. Ellis today also denied a request by a handful of media outlets, including the AP, New York Times, and CNN, to unseal the names of the jurors before the end of the trial. The judge said he couldn't do that without endangering their safety. He then revealed he's received threats that now require him to travel with a U.S. Marshals detail. Ellis also said he was surprised by all the attention on this trial, which today had the president's sympathetic ear.
I think the whole Manafort trial is very sad. When you look at what's going on there, I think it's a very sad day for our country. He happens to be a very good person.
It didn't take long for word of the president's comment to reach the Manafort defense team at their table in a restaurant near the court, where they await updates with Manafort's wife, Kathleen.
Any reaction to the president's comments this morning?
Great comments. Mr. Manafort really appreciates the support of President Trump.
How are you feeling? Clearly deliberating longer, it favors your client?
I do. I'm with him. And he does.
I'm told that during deliberations, Paul Manafort is kept in a small jail cell inside the courthouse with no access to a TV or reading material. Bret?
Back at it Monday. Peter, thank you. Well, he is known for his outlandish ideas and deep pockets. But now billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk is facing scrutiny by the Securities and Exchange Commission over a single tweet. And as chief congressional correspondent Mike Emanuel reports, it could be problematic when it comes to the funding of some of his other big projects.
With electric car maker Tesla in turmoil, Elon Musk appears to be buckling under the pressure. Musk has complained of exhaustion taking a toll on his health. A tweet 10 days ago has gotten the attention of federal investigators, with Musk writing, "Am considering taking Tesla private at $420, funding secured." That middle of the trading day tweet sent Tesla stock soaring, but it turns out the funding was far from secure.
I believe that the SEC staff will be looking into a variety of aspects of his conduct, but this is not going away quickly.
Musk has said he was referring to Saudi investment. He bragged earlier this summer about his ability to raise money.
We've probably raised on the order of $20 billion. All things included.
Musk's businesses, including Tesla, SpaceX, and Solar City, have received an estimated $5 billion over the years in government incentives, including grants, tax breaks, and discounted loans. Yet the full scope of government benefits isn't known because it has been given out by federal, state, and local governments over time. One expert says all of that creates an artificial reality.
If you muddle the price point at which you're competitive by adding in subsidies, you have to wonder if you have a product that's actually competitive.
Musk has defended benefiting from government cash.
You add up all the subsidies that Solar City and Tesla get, it is 1/1000th of what the oil and gas industry get in a single year.
Experts say there is risk in depending on federal subsidies. A $7,500 tax credit for people buying electric vehicles like Tesla's is expected to be phased out by the end of next year. Bret?
We'll follow this. Mike, thanks. The Dow jumped today 111. The S&P 500 rose 9. The Nasdaq finished ahead 10. For the week, the Dow gained almost 1.5%. The S&P 500 grew by a little over 0.5%, and the Nasdaq dropped by about 1/3. A federal judge is giving hundreds of children and their parents more time in the U.S. after extending a freeze on deporting families separated at the U.S.-Mexico border. The judge saying in his order Thursday that deporting children after unification with parents would deprive them of their right to seek asylum. The ACLU had requested families be given at least a week. The Trump administration opposed the move, saying parents waived children's right to pursue asylum claims after signing deportation forms. Thursday, we reported that nearly 198 people die every single day from overdoses in the U.S. 198. Tonight, we look at how border protection agents are trying to fight the flow of illegal drugs into the U.S. from secret warehouses near some of the country's biggest airports. It's a visual you have to see to believe, and you'll see it here. Correspondent Claudia Cowan with the story from San Francisco.
A bag of suspicious powder.
500 grams.
Could be opioids bought online, stopped by Customs and Border Protection at this entry point for international parcels, one of 9 in the U.S.
Fentanyl in particular is extremely dangerous. It's something that we intercept regularly.
While commercial shippers like FedEx and UPS must provide customs officials with packaging information in advance, making suspicious mail easier to spot, there's no such requirement for the U.S. Postal Service. And according to one congressional report, drug labs in China and Mexico are taking advantage of the situation, sending hundreds of pounds of deadly fentanyl and other illicit narcotics through the U.S. mail.
We've seen a lot of activity with, criminal organizations, transnational in scope, that again they recognize that they can make a lot of money with opioids, with fentanyl.
Drugs are tested and used as evidence by Homeland Security investigations and criminal prosecutions. But agents admit disrupting the illicit opioid supply chain is an uphill battle.
We're seeing huge increases, and it's challenging and it's troubling.
Congress is now considering legislation to beef up security around overseas mail. Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman has introduced the STOP Act that would require the U.S. Postal Service to provide customs officials with electronic shipping data in advance, just like private mail carriers do now.
To me, this is shocking, and it should be something that we can do something about. This is a federal agency, after all.
The STOP Act has passed in the House and heads to a vote by the full Senate in the next few months. Meantime, every box, every letter is considered suspicious and subject to inspection. More than 1 million packages every month at this one facility here in San Francisco. Nationally, by one estimate, more than 500 million pieces of mail every year.
Bret.
Claudia Cowan in San Francisco. Claudia, thank you. Up next, why our nation's motto is causing a stir as kids head back to class. We'll explain. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 2 in San Francisco, where lawyers say they're preparing for trial for two men charged in the deaths of 36 people in an Oakland warehouse fire. The trial comes after a plea deal with prosecutors fell apart. Fox 7 in Miami, where a 28-year-old Alaska man will spend the rest of his life in prison for last year's shooting at a Florida airport that left 5 people dead and 6 wounded. A judge handing down that sentence today for Esteban Santiago, who pleaded guilty back in May. And this is a live look at Detroit from our affiliate, Fox 2. The big story there tonight, mourners will have 4 days to pay their respects to Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, who died Thursday after a battle with pancreatic cancer. An official with the city of Detroit says her body will lie in repose at the city's Museum for African American History for 2 days, starting August 28th. Her funeral will be held at the Greater Grace Temple on August 31st. A memorial concert is also in the works. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Investigators have recovered the bodies of a pregnant Colorado mom and her 2 young daughters. They say they were found on Shannon Watts' property, on the property owned by Anadarko Petroleum, where her husband Chris worked. The bodies of what is believed to be their 3- and 4-year-old daughters nearby. Police have not discussed a motive, but the family had been in financial trouble in recent years. Watts is being held without bail, is expected to be charged on Monday, and authorities say he has confessed. A rising star in the Democratic Party and among Democratic socialists is facing criticism after her campaign banned journalists from covering a town hall meeting with voters this week. Local New York news outlet reports that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's campaign prevented reporters from attending a campaign event in Corona on Sunday, even though it was open to the rest of the public. Ocasio-Cortez called the report a non-story, responding on Twitter today that the campaign indicated previously this event would be closed to the press in order to protect any attendees. In God We Trust is our national motto. It's printed on all our currency. But it took specific laws to require schools in 6 states to display it. And that is not without controversy. Religion correspondent Lauren Green looks at both sides of this issue.
As students head back to classrooms in Florida, they see "In God We Trust" prominently posted on school walls. It's now mandatory.
It seems good since it seems patriotic.
"In God We Trust" has been our national motto since the mid-1950s. It's on our currency and in the halls of Congress. But as religious tensions have grown in the U.S. with increased demands for religious liberty, 6 states have passed laws in the last year either allowing or requiring the phrase to be displayed in public schools. Tennessee, Louisiana, and Arkansas join Florida as states where it's required, while in Alabama and Arizona, it's optional. The push for these laws comes from what's called Project Blitz, a campaign sponsored by the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation. Its handbook suggests 20 model bills for conservative lawmakers to use. The proposal for displaying "In God We Trust" is first on the list.
You have people that feel like today that they're being censored if they just mention the word God. This is what gives meaning and purpose to the lives of so many individuals in this country.
But some critics and even parents see the law as a violation of separation of church and state.
The first duty of government is to represent all of its people, and never to send a message that certain individuals have more rights or are better respected by the state than others.
I don't really want the school system pushing them one way or the other.
It's likely we could see some challenges to the public display of the motto "In God We Trust," but legal experts tell us it's not easy. Even the most liberal courts have deemed it more a show of patriotism than religious belief. Bret.
Lauren, thank you. Up next, whatever happened to ISIS? First, beyond our borders tonight, 2 Palestinians were killed, dozens wounded during a weekly protest along the border with Israel. Protesters threw rocks and fire bombs. Israeli forces responded with live fire and tear gas. The mass protests continue as Egypt works to broker an end to months of violence between Israel and Hamas. Monsoon storms in India have killed more than 300 people. Today, rescuers used helicopters and hundreds of boats to evacuate thousands of people stranded on their rooftops following unprecedented flooding in the southern part of India. As we first reported last night, bomb threats to several planes in Chile and Peru forced them to make emergency landings or turn back to their originating airports Thursday. Chile's civil aviation agency said authorities received a total of 11 false bomb threats called in anonymously to concessions in Santiago's airport, LATAM Airlines, and the aviation agency. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back. The Trump administration is pledging to try to help prevent wildfires and fight those that have been burning all across California and much of the West. But the kind of help they're offering doesn't exactly sit well with environmentalists. National correspondent William Lajeunesse reports from Los Angeles.
Look at that. As more fires burn longer, the blame game begins.
Some people would like to, they don't have a problem with watching habitat burn down, and yet the only endangered species happens to be a logger.
The people? Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke refers to are environmentalists who for years have fought efforts to clear dead and dying trees, which cause fires to grow bigger and burn faster.
The density of trees is historic. You have lack of public access. So we've closed a lot of roads. We've let roads overgrown so that even when a lightning strike or man-made fire occurs, we can't get at it.
Experts say Zinke is right. Overgrown forests help small brush fires grow out of control.
We'd like to be managing ecosystems with more prescribed fire to reduce fuels in the environment.
What got Zinke into trouble was a denial that climate change had, quote, nothing to do with wildfire. He has since walked it back.
Do you accept that climate change is part of the problem?
Of course. But the damage was done.
Warmer weather will mean a longer window in which forest fires are favored.
In Washington State, Governor Jay Inslee ripped Zinke, calling him a tool of the oil industry and a climate denier. While many experts say hotter summers, drier winters, reduced humidity lower a fire's ignition point, creating bigger fires year-round.
Climate change worsens fire seasons by having a longer fire season.
President Trump suggested California's water shortage hindered the state's ability to fight fire. Officials here say that's not true, though at times rules protecting wildlife prohibit taking water from wilderness areas. While both sides point fingers, large fires continue burning, polluting the air, making climate change worse. And while there is general agreement among scientists on how to manage forests, that consensus does not exist among politicians. Bret?
William, thank you. Tonight we are answering the question, whatever happened to ISIS? Once feared for that group's dominance in Iraq and Syria and possible expansion elsewhere, the power of the terror group definitely shrunk for months. But is ISIS mounting a comeback now? As Lucas Tomlinson reports, the fight is far from over.
Last year, the U.S. military dropped nearly 40,000 bombs on ISIS from the skies of Iraq and Syria, roughly 23,000 through the first half of last year. But over the same time this year, those strikes have been vastly reduced. 88% fewer bombs, as fewer targets remain. In 2014, ISIS controlled an area the size of Ohio in parts of Iraq and Syria. Today, roughly 1,000 ISIS fighters are holed up in Hajin, a small city in eastern Syria near the border with Iraq. But Defense Secretary Mattis isn't ready to declare mission accomplished quite yet.
I don't declare victory until it's in the rearview mirror. Whether it's hard fighting ahead, as I've said, as we close in, what happened with ISIS is they become more concentrated. So there is hard fighting ahead.
Late last month, President Trump said the end is near for the terror group.
We're destroying the bloodthirsty killers known as ISIS. Almost gone. We'll be coming out of Syria like very soon. Let the other people take care of it now.
But a former senior counterterrorism director under President Obama warned the current president not to pull the roughly 2,000 U.S. troops out of Syria and thousands more in Iraq too soon.
At times I worry that you see from President Trump a desire to move on from counterterrorism. It's something that his predecessors showed at times too, but The problem is that the mission continues.
Pentagon officials warn hundreds of ISIS fighters have moved underground and see them moving back to their terrorist roots after a series of kidnappings and bombings has raised fears 7 months after Iraq's prime minister declared victory. And the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, remains at large, despite a $25 million bounty on his head. 2 Americans were recently captured in Syria as ISIS members and shipped back to the U.S. to face charges in federal court, not Guantanamo Bay. But questions remain about the roughly 600 ISIS prisoners in Syria from 40 different countries. Bret.
Lucas Tomlinson at the Pentagon. Lucas, thank you. Up next, our panel.
China remains our biggest long-term challenge. Without focused involvement and engagement by the United States and our allies and partners, China will realize its dream of hegemony in Asia. We should cooperate with Beijing where we can, but stand ready to confront them where we must.
Well, that is Admiral Harry Harris a couple of months ago talking about China and the threat from China. He's the former U.S. Pacific Forces commander. Now a new report from the Pentagon suggests China is targeting the U.S. or definitely training for strikes against the U.S. The annual report to Congress over the last 3 years, the Army there in China expanding its overwater bomber operating areas, a stealthy long-range strategic bomber with nuclear delivery capability that could be operational within the next 10 years. Computer systems, definitely investing in that, attacking U.S. government systems. China's comprehensive military modernization program aimed at increasing its military and making it world-class by 2049. So with that, let's bring in our panel. Tom Rogan, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner. Karen Tumulty, opinion writer for the Washington Post. And Morgan Ortegas, national security analyst and co-founder of Go Advisors. Morgan, let me start with you. We get these reports annually. I used to cover the Pentagon. It's always an assessment, but this one really raised some eyebrows today.
Yeah, I think anyone who's watching the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese military expansion, this isn't a surprise, actually. If you look at the president's national security strategy, one of the things that you hear the administration talking about most is this great power conflict that we're entering, this era of great power competition, specifically with the Chinese. So with the amount of money that the Chinese are spending on their military, I think it's natural that they're building up their capabilities. They're looking at, with the South China Sea, their sphere of influence, right? They want us to have less influence in their region. They want navigation of the seas. So the Chinese military buildup is not a surprise to me. But what I do think that we have had our eye off the ball for the past 10 years in Republican and Democrat administrations is how we effectively counter them and how we maintain freedom of navigation and freedom of the seas.
I mean, speaking of navigation, we've got these pop-up islands, Karen, in the South China Sea that the U.S. Navy has had kind of skirmishes with the Chinese, trying to hold the line there as they get, as you see, naval vessels through that area. There's some tense times in that area.
And I think that our national conversation about China, particularly in the Trump administration, has been primarily an economic one. We've talked about China in terms of tariff wars. I do think that, and certainly back during the Obama administration, they kept talking about their great pivot to Asia that never seemed to quite happen. I do think that we do have to start realizing that China really is the next great superpower and that their goals are expanding their influence, not just in Asia, but around the world.
Here's the Vice President, Tom. We were talking about this possible space force, the administration moving forward this. He mentioned China.
China claimed to have made its first successful test of a hypersonic vehicle just last week. Hypersonic missiles designed to fly up to 5 miles per second at such low altitudes that they could potentially evade detection by our missile defense radars. As their actions make clear, our adversaries have transformed space into a warfighting domain already.
So you think that the trade stance and the talking out about the military tied together?
I do. And I wasn't sure about that a couple of months ago, but now I think from the administration, you see Mike Pompeo today meeting a Tibetan monk. You see the invitation of the Taiwanese president in town. You also see the US Navy really kind of catching up with the Chinese with some of these standoff missile platforms, and also perhaps moving more towards the submarine fleet, away from the carriers actually behind the scenes in doctrine because of their vulnerabilities to China Chinese missiles. But I think the exigent point is that this is the new challenge for the 21st century. One positive, I think the alliances, Vietnam now, and incredibly growing very close to the United States, that allows us to push back some of that Chinese influence.
Second day of stories about the security clearance being pulled from former CIA Director John Brennan. Take a listen.
We were unanimous in our view that using the security clearance process to punish a political opponent was simply inappropriate, even though we all admit that the president does have absolute authority in this area. It's just a bad thing to do for the health of the American Republic.
If Mr. Trump believes that this is going to lead me to just to go away and be quiet, he is very badly mistaken.
There's no silence. If anything, I'm giving him a bigger voice. Many people don't even know who he is, and now he has a bigger voice, and that's okay with me because I like taking on voices like that. I've never respected him. I've never had a lot of respect.
Talking there about John Brennan, now you have about 75 former intel officials and officers putting out a letter in support of Brennan. Karen, one of them is Admiral William McRaven. We ran some of this yesterday in an op-ed. I'd consider it an honor if you would revoke my security clearance as well so I can add my name to the list of men and women who have spoken up against your presidency. If you think for a moment that your McCarthy-era tactics will suppress the voices of criticism, you're sadly mistaken. He's the former head of Special Ops Command, led the the Osama bin Laden raid, but he made that op-ed in a phone call to you?
Well, actually, he called me and I didn't pick up my phone, and so he actually dictated it into my voicemail. He is currently on vacation away from cell coverage and away from Wi-Fi coverage, but he said he really felt strongly that he had something to say. I've known Bill for a very long time, since 5th grade, as it happens, and he is not a partisan. He is a patriot.